Just giving the others a few more minutes to log in, and if they don't, they will have to catch up with us. So, did anybody have any audit issues since we last met? No? Has anybody experienced any frauds over the last week?
No.
No frauds? Okay, that's good. Doesn't mean that they're not happening, but if you didn't experience it, that's good. What about errors? Yes, errors?
No.
No errors either? I mean, everything went smoothly. Nobody made any errors to be corrected that you almost missed and then you saw it and fixed it. And you guys have a quiet life. Okay, let's see who's in the room so far. Danielle, are you there? Not yet. Okay. India.
I'm here.
Hi, India. Welcome back. Let's see. Alex. Alexandria. What in the world happened to Alexandria? Gretchen. Gretchen? Rosalie.
I'm here. I
Okay.
literally just signed on.
Okay, welcome aboard, Rosalie. Way to go. I think when you signed on, Gretchen must have signed off.
Probably.
Okay, Ebonique. Ebonique. Okay. Maybe folks signed on, and ran off the watch. Let's make a deal. Karen. Karen.
Yes, right here.
Karen, how do you pronounce your name? Karen, Karen?
Karen.
Karen, okay. Car is in car. Way to go. Okay, welcome back. All right, so we have a quorum. We have enough persons to get cracking. So let's get cracking. Couple of housekeeping matters first. Does anybody remember when your midterm will be held?
6 weeks.
And which week is the 6th week? Which
Week
date?
after next. On a Thursday?
Which date is that?
Lord.
You
Today's
guys,
the 10th,
nobody travels on the calendar anymore.
6th. And then 8th. And this is it. Okay. 7, 9, 13. The 20th?
20th. Who agrees with India? 2 weeks from now,
Meaning,
it's the 20th.
so basically it's only this class, a next class, and then the exam.
Absolutely. Remember, I said it at the beginning, do not fall behind. You have to keep reading, keep reading, keep reading. Time passes quickly. Weeks passing faster than you can imagine. Okay?
So the
Uh,
exam is on the 20th.
well, I don't know. We're trying to get a consensus. What is 2 weeks from today?
Oh, I thought you
I'm
already
no,
had that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilkinson, just joining, but the 20th is a Monday.
The 20th is a Monday,
Whoop.
which is not our day.
Yes. The
Well,
16th would
today,
be
yeah,
2 weeks from now.
Okay,
yeah, that would be on a Thursday.
make a note, everybody. The midterm is on June the 16th. Okay? 2 weeks from
That,
today.
right, that's what I was ever thinking.
Yeah. So we have today's.
So is it gonna be virtual or we have to come in?
I'm waiting to get confirmation from BIFs as we speak. As soon as I find out, I'll drop you either an email or confirm it when we meet next week, one or the other. Okay.
So they usually do exams.
Sorry,
2 weeks
Mr.
before,
Wilkinson, one
or
more
they
thing.
would-
Will this be in person?
That's what I'm waiting to hear, whether it'll be in person or virtually. Okay, I'll confirm
Okay,
that.
because I'll be traveling that week. Pardon me?
Or you'll be traveling that week?
Yeah.
My.
That's the 6th week. That's the 6th week when right. So 5 weeks of course, and 6th week is the
But then this is a virtual class. So that was one of the first questions I asked you.
No, but I know best normally is do in-house exams. They don't never do. I don't know what it is to do a virtual exam, but I know normally they do in-house.
Well, during COVID, we had a lot of virtual exams. Now that we're still in COVID, interestingly enough, um, I'm just waiting. I know we started. They started to do a couple of in-house exams, particularly with final exams. Allow the midterms to be virtual, but I'll get confirmation and I'll certainly let everybody know. Okay, between now and next class, which one it will be. Okay. All right, because that's important. Okay, let me just put an asterisk to that.
So let me ask you this. I know when I did my other class to BIFs, they did it on a Saturday. Oh, is that that's not standard procedure? I mean, do y'all do it throughout the week as well, or it's not normally done on the weekend, seeing most people working through the week?
Well, no, typically what happens, whatever day we hold class, that would be the day you write the examination, unless something extraordinary needs to happen. But the normal thing would be that you write it on the date that you actually do the class. In this case, Thursday. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So the two important pieces of housekeeping done. June the 16th is your midterm, and I will confirm verbal versus in-house for your midterm examination and of course your final. The other thing is, have you guys started looking at your case study yet?
Wait, what?
No, sir. 'Cause still waiting on the information.
You sent the case study to us?
I haven't sent you your case studies yet?
No, we keep every week we ask you for that. You say don't worry
No,
for that.
you haven't sent it.
What
You
did I
said
say?
you wanted us to get more knowledge of the class first.
So that's true. You guys remember everything. That's fantastic. That is true. So my plan then, after this afternoon, I think we'll be well and on our way. And I can probably send you your case studies so that at least you can start looking at them. Did I tell you how long you had to do the case study?
It's due by the end of the course.
Yeah, end of the semester. And then what else did I say about it?
Don't wait till the last minute to start it.
Absolutely. And if you finish before the end of the semester, you can do what?
Turn it in.
Absolutely. Okay. So
We
please.
just waiting on you, Mr. Wilkinson. He's trying to start from day one, but you holding us up.
No, I didn't want you to start from day one. I
Mm.
wanted you to get into the groove first. and all that kind of stuff. And then when you pick it up, you'd be like, oh, okay, I could do this because now you have information. Okay. And you will get more information. So I'm not saying don't try to finish the paper at the end of the day, last minute, but certainly give yourself a couple of more sessions as you read and begin your note preparations for your case study, because the more information you have, the better you'll be able to approach the questions. Okay. All right. But the key is to do a little at a time and not wait until the last minute. That's the key. Okay? All right. Now I can email that. Any other housekeeping questions? Okay. So then let's jump into the material. I know we were finishing up module 2. We were almost to the end of module 2. And does anybody remember where we left off? Like, what were we discussing when we closed off module 2 last time? Let me see if we're all on the same page.
Child, Mr. Wilkinson, this week was so rough.
I know.
And listen, I already told myself, oh gosh, my baby ripped off my pages. Where are the rest of my pages? Anyways, um, I just was saying, I don't even know how I can make it in class today because this week I didn't prepare like that, like how I usually do.
That's
So I
okay.
gonna have to,
That,
this week was hard.
that's fine. You're gonna have days like that. You're gonna have weeks like that. The key is now, this is a holiday weekend, but this holiday weekend is not for you guys. Holiday weekends are not for people who are studying, who are doing courses, and who are in school. Holiday weekends for other people. Holiday weekends for you guys is to catch up on your reading, your studying, your note taking, and then you, in this case, you're gonna have a case to read your case through and see what it's all about. So you guys should be very busy this holiday weekend, and this would be a good time to catch up on everything, past and what we're gonna do today. So by the time this holiday weekend is over, you'll be up to date on all of your reading, and you can actually start taking notes and studying, et cetera, all in this holiday weekend. Does that mean you break your neck? No. You put in a couple of hours and then you take a break. Find something amusing. Watch TV. Watch Netflix. Go to whatever. Go to the mall. Whatever you do. Then come back and do some more. Then take a break and do some more and for the whole weekend. But basically, while everybody's having fun, you should be busy taking appropriate breaks in between, of course, so you don't drive yourself bonkers. I know that's not an exciting prospect, um, but that's something I used to do when I was a student a million years ago in any course, okay? Because I wanted to be successful. I had to pay for all of my own courses. I didn't have companies to pay for me, parents to pay for me, guardians to pay for none of that stuff. So I had to be very, very deliberate. And that meant all holidays I was studying while folks are flying off to Waikiki and Fort Lauderdale. I was studying and all this kind of crazy stuff. And so I know we all have our different agendas, but I encourage you to use, especially times like this, weekends and holiday weekends, to really catch up so that you can maximize. And then once you come out of the holiday weekend, you'll be up to date and ready to go and moving towards being ready and prepared for your midterm exam. Okay? If you don't take advantage of this holiday weekend to catch up, then next week might be crazy again. And then before you know it, the next week is what? Examinations. And you're like, man, God must be hates me. He doesn't hate you. You just have to take my advice. All right. So module 2, we were all the way down to page 12 or thereabouts. We were talking about the basic principles of the audit. If you remember, I don't remember who was reading. Who was reading at the time? Somebody was reading that stuff for me, I believe.
You mean the last bit?
Yeah, coming down the stretch.
That was me.
Was
Hold on,
that
let me
that
find
was
the
you,
page.
that was you, Rose?
Yes, that was me.
Yeah,
I was the one who read last. You say basic
absolutely.
principles.
Yeah, yeah, basic principles. Principles, errors, frauds, etc. All the way down to the basic principles of audit. When we were saying that the audit had certain professional responsibilities, and we were looking at them one by one, that the auditor should have integrity, be objective, and be independent. Of course,
Uh-huh.
nobody should be able to sway the auditor. Cannot give them money. Cannot give them new cars and new houses to do what you want. You cannot give them dancing girls to persuade them to be unethical. Okay?
Hmm.
Very fundamental principles of the audit. Very much so. Confidentiality. Remember, I said no talking to people about people's business. Whatever information the auditor has, it's nobody's business except for the purpose of doing the audit. Once the audit is done, the auditor is not required to go and discuss it with anybody he knows. Spouse, family members, friends, politicians, no one. Priests, nobody. Lawyers, none of that stuff. Confidential means confidential. Okay. Uh, Skill and performance, the auditor must make sure that they're ready and competent to do the job. If they're called to do, for example, a financial audit, and they don't have experience in financial audits, they should not attempt to do that audit, even though they're auditors. Even though auditors are auditors, they're not all capable of doing all types of audit, which is why the most experienced auditors should do the job that is relevant to their experience. Okay, so that
Okay,
there's,
I have a question.
yep.
How does one gain experience if not given the opportunity to do so?
Well, here's what happens. You might be, you might be, let's say you're an auditor for one of the auditing firms. What happens oftentimes is that certain auditors are found out in different groups, different kinds of organizations. And so what happens over time is because one group of auditors uh, continue to do the same types of audits over and over, they become what we call specialists in that area, and oftentimes do not find themselves doing other types of audits for just because the organization didn't plan it that way. Okay? And so as a result of that, once you become a specialist in the area, then it's more than likely that you will continue to do audits in that area. Does it mean that you can't audit other areas? No, it doesn't. If for some reason they need to move you and put you in a new area to audit, like a nonprofit organization which you've never audited before, you still have your basic audit skills. You don't lose them because you specialize in a financial audit, okay, or agricultural audit, or whatever the case might be. You still have the basic auditing principles. So even though you haven't done nonprofit audits before, you can still go and apply the fundamentals to the audit process and come up with a suitable outcome. Okay, that's all that means. So there are some auditors, for example, who are great at auditing banks, but they're not great at auditing other kinds of entities. Okay, just because they don't do them very often, but it doesn't mean they cannot do it. Because once you learn the fundamental principles, you should be able to audit anything. But again, how well you do it is a matter of experience. And so even though you have the basic fundamental skills, experience is something that comes as you practice doing a particular thing, okay? For sure. So that's a very good question, but that's generally how it works, okay? Depending on the audit firm. Some audit firms have auditors who specialize in different types of audits. Some audit firms have, they keep shifting them around, so the majority of auditors can get a rounded experience in different types of audits. It just depends on the audit firm. Okay? In any event, they should have the basic training, academic skills, and the competence. Whether they have enough experience, time and circumstance will determine that. And of course, they will more than likely be working with somebody with experience, so they'll be okay, for the most part. Uh, the other principle, work performed by other people. Remember, we said the auditor had to rely on other people. And even though you have to rely on other people, you still have to use common sense and the information they give you. If they give you some stuff and it doesn't look right to you, even though you're not an expert in that area, you still have to raise a question and say, are you sure this is correct? It doesn't look completely so. And then it's, yeah, it's correct. I've looked over it. And so you may have to say, fine, bite the bullet and take their word. Okay? But in any event, one of the principles, principle 4 says, hey, we have to be at the point where we have to be able to rely on the work of others. Okay? For sure. Unfortunately or fortunately. Documentation, we said, is a crucial part of the process. Everything should be written down, document, so that you can have a record of everything you've done. If somebody decides to sue the audit firm, you can produce evidence of the audit. If you need to go back and check something from the year before, you can go back to your documents. Very crucial part of the auditing process. Planning, of course, is self-explanatory. Plan the audit. Who's going to do what, when, and when, for how long? Who has the knowledge to do specific things and who doesn't? Assign those persons who are most competent and capable in particular areas. All that is part of the audit planning. Organizations don't see that process. Auditors do that in their own firm and arm themselves just like soldiers arm themselves for war. They plan it and they come into your organization and execute. And how well they execute is a function of how well they plan the audit. Not all audit firms plan well, and therefore not all of them execute well. But that's another problem. Okay? Audit evidence is another responsibility that auditors consider. When you go into a firm, you have to check enough account balances and statements and documents, etc., to satisfy yourself that the policies and gap and procedures are being done according to the requirements, and that there's enough evidence in place to show that people are doing the right thing. Okay? So auditors are constantly checking documentation and policies and files and ledgers and trial balances and so on, just to make sure that there's enough information available to support whatever they have to do, so that when they give their audit opinion, they can have a table to stand on. They can draw reasonable conclusions. They can come up with an opinion that is satisfactory because they've checked in their minds sufficient information to justify a positive opinion. Okay? And then, of course, we have internal controls. Auditors have to come in and see if the internal controls are working. Oftentimes, they go in and they find that internal controls are weak. For example, one person signing checks, that's never good. That's an internal control failure. One person doing 3 and 4 functions, that's an internal control failure. It should never happen, ever. But some companies do it for some reason or the other. Whenever auditors see any of these control weaknesses, they should bring it to management's attention and make a documentation that this is what they found and this is what needs to be done to fix it. So he comes in as part of his work and evaluates all of these internal controls for 2 reasons. 1, to see if they are working and in place, and 2, to see if the auditor can rely on the system itself of internal controls, or they have to be looking more closely. In other words, if you come in and you see that two people are signing checks, 3 people are authorizing transactions, the warehouse has somebody checking stuff coming in, the requisitions are going out and being signed by 2 and 3 people, one write it up, one authorize it, one approve it. When you see things like that, auditor knows that those internal controls are working, and therefore they can rely on the basic transactions that are going on in that firm, and therefore they may not have to check so much paper. But if they come in and they see that those things are not in place, it's going to concern the auditor, which means that they're going to have to stay there longer and check more stuff because they're not comfortable with the level of internal controls, meaning that a lot of things can slip through the cracks because nobody is quote unquote checking, literally. Right? Believe it or not, it may not be happening in your firm, but it happens in a lot of companies. So, what does the auditor do with the evidence that we saw earlier in 7? Well, he takes this evidence and he draws conclusions. And those conclusions are written down in what we call an audit report. And that audit report is what we refer to as the auditor's opinion of the financial statements or financial information, right? And of course, we'll see later on, I think we kind of ended up saying that there are different types of audit opinions, that we have the qualified opinion, which means that something is wrong and some things need to fix. We have the unqualified opinion, and somebody said, unqualified, I thought that was bad. Well, it's not. Unqualified opinion is the opinion you want, meaning that the auditor generally has no problems with the organization's financial information. Adverse opinion means that some things have gone on to make it difficult for the auditor to do its work. For example, files are missing, documents are missing, people can't find the trial balance can't balance for some reason, they can't find the differences. All these things leaves the auditor uneasy, and so he cannot give a good opinion. He has to come up with an adverse opinion and say, too many things are not in place, and so we're not happy with the procedure. And then, of course, the final disclaimer of opinion is a whole other program where the auditor might feel that the senior management is just totally uncooperative for whatever reason, and therefore the auditor does not want to proceed with trying to give any kind of opinion with regards to the financial position of that company. The disclaimer is probably the worst of the lot. Okay? But we'll see those different types of opinions later. For now, if I ask you a question about opinions, I might say, okay, list 2 or 3 types of audit opinions that we might find once the audit is complete, and then you just rush down in your mind to point 9 on the basic principles and says, okay, adverse, disclaimer, and qualify, or whatever 3 you remember. Okay. Okay. Now, audit types, basically for our purposes, there are 2 types that you need to know, statutory and voluntary. They're not difficult concepts. Okay. We are told that voluntary audits are pretty much done on regular firms and partnerships. There's no legal requirement for doing them. Companies do it because they want to make sure that there's no hanky-panky and that the financial records are in order. They also do it because they owe banks money and they want their lenders to see that they're in good standing and that the company is still able to meet their commitment to the bank. Okay? But these are all voluntary audits by the company themselves. Sometimes they do it to satisfy government requirements, but it's not mandatory. So if the government requires it in order to approve certain transactions, make payments, grant loans, and so on. That's the key.
Sorry, Mr. Wilkins,
Yes.
I just have a quick question. I guess it's probably a housekeeping item, right?
Mm-hmm.
I see you say certain things as it relates to what may or may not be on the test, right? But they sound like they're going to be mostly short answer questions. Is there a certain format you usually take on with your exams?
Yeah, it's going to be basically definitions and short answer questions. What is a definition? Might be define the following: statutory audit. See? Qualified opinion.
Right. So it's mostly it's just going to be short answer questions. No multiple choice,
no definitions and short answer questions. No multiple choice. Okay. Yeah. No multiple choice questions. If you see a multiple choice question, it escaped and got into my examination by accident, which means that every now and then I'll just throw in a teaser multiple choice, which would be 1 question, but no, typically there'll be no multiple choice questions, short answer questions and definitions. Okay. All right. Good question, actually. So that's your voluntary audit. Who knows what a statutory audit is?
I know that is mandated by law.
Yeah.
By law?
Yeah, the parliament passes a law and say you must have this audit done. And once the law requires it, you don't have a choice. You can't say this year we don't feel like doing an audit, because you do not have a choice where statutory audits are required. For example, in the Bahamas, Financial institutions are required by law to be audited every year. They don't have a choice. And auditors love it because every year they can look forward to a whole bunch of, who knows?
You say the auditors love it because what?
They can look forward to a whole bunch
Money?
of course.
Yeah.
If it's statutory, then companies have to go to the audit firm and have it done, correct?
Yes.
If it
So
was,
so if so other reasons that you would be paying an auditor, what would be that reason? If I could understand the one by law, but if you know that your company isn't doing something that they're supposed to be doing, we wouldn't go out there and ask for an audit. So what would be the reason for those other types of audits?
well, here's what happens. Where the audit is not statutory, where it's voluntary, you might say, well, what happens now if it's voluntary? You don't have to do it. Well, maybe it is not statutory or mandatory, but for example, if you would like to borrow money from a bank, what do you think the bank will tell you?
Oh, okay. So they would need to see. So an audit is almost like a person who, like an appraisal or so. Like if a person was buying a house or whatever, they need an appraisal or like trying to apply for money. So audit, if a company needed to go and get money from a bank, the bank want to see the credibility of the company, so they request the audit like that.
Absolutely, like that. That's a very simple way of putting it, but it's the correct way. That's it. It's very much that way. Okay. So if you want to buy property or sell property or whatever, you go to an appraisal and have an appraisal done. You want to borrow money from the bank said, great, we'll consider your loan application, but make sure you know that we need to have your firm audited before we decide to give our money to you. See my point?
Yeah.
All right. We're not giving you $5 million just because you say you're doing well or because you produce some financial statements from your accounts department. Also, all well and good, but we need an independent source to go in, check out that information, and come back and tell us independently that all is well. And when we get that unqualified audit report, then we'll sit down and start the application process. Until then, yeah, absolutely. Interim audit, typically an audit that's done between audits. Usually audits are done annually. So an interim audit might be done in between the annual audit period from 1 year to the next, maybe the first quarter, the first 6 months, or management might request during the year a special audit. They might get some inside information that somebody's stealing, and they might ask the auditors to come and check it out. Do an interim audit of the cash or some other issues. That's not part of the normal annual audit. Okay? When an interim audit occurs, the auditor doesn't have the great responsibility that they have when they do an annual audit, but they do come in with the same kind of audit face in order to resolve the problem. Many firms, because of their size, they conduct interim audits during the year just to keep track of what's going on in the organization so they don't lose track of it. And many of them end up doing what we call continuous audits, which is the next point, where audits occur, staff is engaged throughout the year checking stuff. For example, if they have thousands of transactions per day, they might have an audit person sitting in a special office in the firm whose job is just to verify that these investment transactions or these sales or whatever is going on by the thousands per day are in fact legitimate, and that nothing is falling through the cracks and nobody's doing anything untoward. Okay, that's where the continuous audit comes in. We don't see that too often in practice, but occasionally it happens, depending on the nature of the firm and the type of business it's doing. Why do we want continuous audit sometimes? Well, one, management can maintain control wherever, especially large firms. Smaller firms, you don't have to do it. But large, humongous firms, in order to keep your finger on the pulse, you may need to have an auditor checking on a regular basis. Uh, if there are any errors and frauds, the continuous audit work will find it sooner, hopefully. And the rule of thumb sooner you find it, the sooner you can correct it. Or if you, the more often you're looking, the sooner you find errors and frauds, and you can fix the situation. If you're not checking too often, you may not find it at all, or you may find it way down the road. And by that time, the culprit has gone off, the situation has changed, and you can't make any kind of progress with it. Okay? Continuous audits also act as a deterrent for staff, those staff members who might be planning to do something untoward and illegal in the firm. They see auditors hanging around, they might think twice about committing a fraud that they normally would commit if there was no auditor there. So some companies do it as a strategy. Okay? And part of that strategy is to keep some staffers away who have sticky fingers and who are always planning ways to defraud the company. Also, continuous audits mean that somebody's always watching, so the accounts department has to be on its P's and Q's. They can't kick back and say, I'll post it next week. They'll be posting at the end of the day because they don't know when the auditor is going to come in and say, we see the day's work. Okay? So it'll certainly keep the accounting department on their P's and Q's. So there's some benefit to having a continuous audit, but most firms do not do that unless they have to, because keeping an audit around throughout the year is a very costly exercise. Unless the benefits are going to outweigh the cost, typical firms are not going to be doing the continuous audit. Only the big guns who can work out that it'll be beneficial for them to have that auditor there to do that work. Okay? All right.
But what is the main difference between an interim audit and a continuous audit? Is it continued? Is it considered a continuous audit if it happens more than once between the two audit periods?
Yeah.
Because if it just happens once, then that isn't like an interim audit.
Yeah. If it happens once for a specific reason during the year, it's considered an interim audit. If the auditor is either in the firm or coming in on a regular basis, monthly, so to speak, or every quarter, that would be considered a continuous audit. Do you follow the difference?
Yes, thank you.
Good question, actually, because some people think that the interim and continuous audit are the same, or that they can be used interchangeably to be the same. They're not. Okay. As you indicated, the interim audit is usually for a one-time specific review of something that management wants done. Continuous audit, on the other hand, is the auditor coming in on a regular basis throughout the year, whether it's monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, whatever the case might be, to check things out. Okay. Very important difference, even though at a glance you might think it's the same thing. All right. And then the final part of this particular module talks about materiality. I don't know how many persons have gotten this. You should have gotten past materiality by now. So if I were to assume that you did, then I would assume that you would have found out that materiality has to do with the type and kind of information that the auditor is looking at. For example, if a misstatement in the financial statements would create a problem for shareholders or anybody reading them, then that misstatement is considered to be material, whether it's $500 or $5 million. Okay, so basically, audit and materiality is a concept that even some auditors don't look like they get sometimes. So non-auditors are often trying to work their way through. Okay, what the hell does this materiality thing mean? Okay. But basically, in a nutshell, it says information is material if you misstate it or leave it out of financial statements or make an error with it, it can influence the decisions of the users, whether they're the shareholders or the bank or the government or whomever is using that information. And so in those cases, the dollar value is not so significant as is the importance of the information itself. Okay? So for example, if you had put in a certain information and that will cause a shareholder to decide to buy more shares, then it becomes a material issue if you leave that out and cause a shareholder not to buy more shares. in the company. See? And that's what we mean by materiality. Anything that is left out or becomes an issue of error or omission that causes the user to not take a decision they normally would take. Okay? That's really the fundamental definition of materiality, and that's what you want to keep in mind. If you notice in point 2, again, the objective of the audit, we talked about that, is to determine that the financial statements are fair and true, and for the auditor to express an opinion on those financial statements as to their true and fairness, and so on. And again, how the auditor expresses that opinion will oftentimes depend on materiality issues as well. For example, if the auditor is about to express a favorable opinion on an audit, like an unqualified audit, and something comes up that creates a materiality problem, for example, an important bit of information was not given to the auditor, and then they subsequently find out about that information, like the company is going to be sued for $50 billion. And the auditor will be like, are you kidding me? Why are you just telling me this now? Oh, well, we know we had told you that would have been a negative thing on the company. We didn't want you. Then all of a sudden, that decision not to tell, even though the lawsuit has not begun yet, it's a contingent liability for the company, meaning if they lose, they have to pay $50 million. That's a very important material piece of information, even though this trial has not even yet begun. And that piece of information could affect the outcome of the auditor's opinion, because that is what we call a material or important bit of information, for sure. On the other hand, if something happens that does not have a major impact on the firm, then of course we say that that information is immaterial, because it really doesn't change too much how the user will make their decisions about that company. So again, the materiality thing is not always as vivid as everybody wants it to be, depending on the situation, and every situation is unique. The important thing for you guys to remember is that really the basic definition of materiality is simply if there's any misstatement or error or omission that will cause the user, okay, to or influence the user in any way, then we say that that particular information is material, whether it's a small amount of money or a large amount of money. Okay? The key is the impact it will have on the decision of the user. That's the key. Okay? If you can remember that part of materiality, then you should be good as budding audit people, and even in understanding if you have a discussion, for example, and the issue of materiality comes up, if you can remember that aspect of it, then you could confidently have your drink while they think you don't know what they're talking about. Okay? The auditor, we told in point 4, makes an effort to establish a materiality level. In other words, they decide, okay, what do we think it will be material in any particular given situation? It's not a science, it's not exact. It's all estimations that they make about the quantity and quality of the misstatements. In other words, they might say, okay, fine, this is a medium-sized company. If we find anything, any errors, any problems under $10,000, we'll consider it immaterial because that's not a lot of money. Okay, they won't worry about it. They won't spend a lot of man hours trying to perhaps hunt it down. Okay. However, in another company, they might discover, are we going to set our materiality threshold at maybe 10 million? Because this is a multi-billion-dollar company, and therefore anything under 10 million, we're not going to spread it. That doesn't mean that the management will be happy with that. I'm just giving an example of how the auditors could potentially set these levels to help them determine what might be considered material or immaterial during a particular audit. For the most part, management doesn't want to get into that aspect of the audit discussion. What management wants them to do is whatever the hell they need to do and hope that they can get an unqualified audit opinion. Okay? So this materiality is all about the auditors and the auditors' work, not necessarily the board and the management, unless something material, say significant comes up that the auditors feel could change the opinion and the outlook of the users of the statements. And if they do find such material fact or situation or dollar amount or circumstance, then they have a duty to report it to the board, okay, for sure.
So materiality is basically based off the auditor's opinion. Then,
Yeah, yes, the auditor will generally draw an opinion about what he or she considers to be a material fact or circumstance. And based on that particular position, they will decide whether to pursue it or not. So it's part of the judgment side of the auditor's work, where they use their judgment, their good sense, their common sense, their experience um, with audits to determine, yes, if a particular situation warrants pursuing it and taking it to the board, or it is not significant enough to spend the time pursuing it. Okay? But that will be in the auditor's judgment and discretion. For sure. Good question, actually. So all throughout the audit, because of this materiality issue that auditors have in their minds and in their plan, they're always looking at the possibility of misstatements. Now the question is, what happens if a misstatement is small? Like the error is a couple $100 each time. Individually, like if it's a one-off thing, may not be a problem. It's not a lot of money. It's not waste time with it. But what happens if the errors or misstatements are cumulative, meaning when they look at the records, they see that it's several $100 every month. Now we have a problem because it's not a one-time thing anymore. It's a cumulative thing, meaning that it happens over and over and over. So even though the amount might be small individually, cumulatively, when we add them all up for the whole year, for example, it can end up in a ton of money. So it goes from a one-time in material amount to, oh, this thing has happened every month for this company here. So all of a sudden, we have a bigger problem than we thought we had. And so the amount is small, but because it's been happening frequently, now when we add them all up, it becomes a material matter. Okay, for sure. Okay. Very interesting part of the auditor's work because oftentimes materiality issues that they learn in the textbooks, the textbook is not the great helper for them. Their judgment, their common sense, and their experience over time helps them to determine how to best manage materiality in each particular entity. Because again, every entity, though it has some similarities in some cases, has many differences, and the auditor has to set its materiality parameters around those particular differences. Okay, for sure. When should the auditor consider materiality? We ask in number 6.6. Well, when the auditor sits down to determine the type of audit they're doing, the time and circumstance of the audit, and the type of audit procedures they'll be using, it's at that time that they have to consider materiality issues. Okay? And then B, when they are evaluating the effect of misstatements. In other words, if they find a misstatement, an error, they have to say to themselves, okay, we found a misstatement. Is it a large enough amount for us to proceed to fix it, report it, deal with it? Or is it so small that we've decided that it's not something that's worth the time to pursue? We'll spend more money chasing it than we would just leaving it alone and writing it off, or whatever the case might be. Again, judgment calls, as you can see, all through the process of determining materiality. Sometimes materiality has to do with large quantities. Other times it doesn't have to be a large quantity, it just has to be a particular principle or circumstance or type of transaction that is unique to the company, that even though the amount may be small, relatively speaking, the principle of the transaction itself has to be reported correctly, and therefore it has to be given attention as a result, even though the dollar amounts may not always necessarily be significant. So, welcome to the auditor's world of materiality. It's a very abstract world. A lot of it is not tangible for them to touch. It's called judgment, common sense, and experience, all intangibles. Same kind of things you do, no doubt, in your own professional lives and personal lives, where all of your problems are not problems you can touch. Some of them are intangible that you cannot touch. Okay? For sure. All right, and then of course, final important principle that the auditor has to consider during the audit, other than materiality, is the going concern concept. And basically, despite all the narrative that follows that you are required to read, of course, no shortcuts. The going concern principle basically says that when the auditor comes in to conduct an audit, it is the auditor's responsibility to assume that the company will continue in business. In other words, they aren't to go in and say, it looks like this company is going to fail, we may as well not do this audit. That's not the auditor's job. The auditor's job is to assume that the companies continue in business until something happens to prove that it is going to be out of business. And so when they walk in, that's the premise on which auditors walk in, the going concern concept. This company is going to go and go and go until something happens to prove otherwise. Okay? Which means that the auditor is not left to make any presumptions unless something of fact comes up to prove that the company is in trouble. And if that is so, they will see that along the way somewhere. Okay? Look at point number 3. Very important point for auditors coming in. The audit report helps establish the credibility of the financial statements. We know that. That's why we do audits. However, the auditor's report is not a guarantee as to the future viability or going concern of the company. In other words, what that means is this. You might get, as a company, a favorable or unqualified audit report, and in 6 months to a year after the audit, the company might end up bankrupt, which happens many times. Is that the auditor's fault? Not necessarily. That's what we're saying here. Now, the management and shareholders of the firm don't feel that way all the time. As far as they're concerned, the auditor just left. How the hell the place can be bankrupt 6 months later or a year later? And they blame the audit firm. And some of them even seek to sue the audit firm if they think that the auditors ought to have seen enough during the audit to prevent a bankruptcy. Auditors do not have a crystal ball. Sometimes they might see some transactions and activities going on and information that could lead to a possible bankruptcy. And if they see that, they have a duty to report to management what they see. And if they have a recommendation, to make a recommendation to management as to what they perhaps should do. Of course, the ultimate decision rests with management at the end of the day. Okay? But the point is, the auditor's report is not a guarantee that the company will continue as a going concern. They cannot do that. They don't have the ability to do that, and the report is certainly not designed to do that. Okay? All right, so that's this going concern thing. This foreseeable future concept that the auditor assumes when they come in.
I have a question.
Yes.
It ain't related to what you spoke about just now, but I have a question about I know you said the government requires all businesses to do at least like one audit per year, if I heard that right.
Yeah, financial institutions are required to do audits once a year.
Okay. How does that work? After the audit, does their report, is it the auditor's responsibility to transfer that information to the government of the Bahamas, or is it the auditor's responsibility just to transfer that information to the financial institution?
Good question. Good question, yes. When the audit report is done and the opinion is completed, the auditors present the auditor's report to the shareholders of the company and its board of directors. Okay?
And
Remember,
then, is it
Mhm.
on them to give it, to show the report to the government?
Well, here's what happens. The government may not necessarily require them to show them the report. What the government expects them to do is to know through their lawyers or otherwise that the report is mandatory. And if the government decides to conduct an audit or a check at any time to see if the audit was done and discover that it was not, then the government, of course, can hold the company liable. But they don't necessarily send a copy of the report to the government. You follow? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the law requires it. Companies know they have to do it. They don't necessarily have to give a copy to the government once they're done. What they are required to do is publish it in the newspaper. Maybe you guys may have seen in the newspaper at the end of every year or the beginning of the new year, somewhere in January, February of each new year, a whole bunch of financial statements sitting in there because the law requires that the financial statements be audited and published in the daily news, all two of them. Okay, that is the compliance requirement. Right. So yeah, that's a good point. No, they don't send a copy to government. Here's your stinking audit that you required by law. They don't do that. They just have it done and publish it as required by law. 2 points at the end. The auditor should consider the risk that the going concern assumption may no longer be appropriate for each engagement. All that means is, even though they cannot tell the future of the firm, they do need to consider that something can happen that could cause the firm not to be a going concern anymore, meaning cause it to be out of business. Okay? They have to consider it, but they cannot, like, in their opinion, say whether they think it's going to be a going concern or not. However, if during the audit they find things that could affect the going concern concept, like the company will go on and on doing business, then they should report that to the board and to shareholders. That's their responsibility. And of course, the issue of the going concern is always an issue that can come into question in terms of what's sitting in the financial statements or any other sources in the firm. But whatever they are, the auditors should be prepared to consider them, but certainly not take responsibility to try to act as a soothsayer and say, I see in the crystal ball that this company is going to go on for business for another 300 years. That the auditor cannot do that. It might, but it might go on for 1 month after the auditor leaves. Hopefully not, because if it goes out of business shortly after the audit, you can be sure that the audit firm will be blamed, even though it's not necessarily the auditor's fault. People just think the auditor should find everything that is wrong, make arrangements to fix it, and then everybody moves on happily ever after. Doesn't quite work that way. Okay, for sure. All right. So you guys have been asking questions along the way. So I'm thinking, please continue to do that. Just jump right in and ask any questions you want. So we can now move into module 3. And let's see what's going on in module 3. All right. What's the heading of module 3? Anyone? Module 3.
Audit planning.
Yeah, audit planning. So we mentioned planning in module 2, that the audit has this job to go out there and plan the audit. And the reason why they do that is because the auditor needs to know how many junior and senior auditors they need for a particular audit. Some audits are small, some audits are medium, some audits are large. Some require one or two persons, some require a couple of auditors to go in, and then depending on the size of the firm, a whole team of auditors may have to go in order to conduct a successful audit. Notice in the very beginning of this, I open up with saying to you that the Audit and Assurance Standard 1, AAS1, that's what that means, Audit and Assurance Standard 1. By the way, just in case you may not have been aware of it, just how we have generally accepted accounting principles that drives the way accountants prepare the financial statements and transactions. Auditors also have a set of standards. It's called generally accepted auditing standards, and within those auditing standards, principles, within those principles, we have these standards. And these standards are designed to keep auditors all on the same page so that they all understand what their responsibilities are, okay, with regards to the various types of jobs that they're doing. In this case, the planning process. And like anything else, oftentimes the planning process is the most important process. You're planning to get married, the planning process is oftentimes the most important process. The rest of it, we kind of work it out. But that planning thing is absolutely necessary if you're going to achieve the required success. And auditing is no different. They are sitting in their audit firms in a big room somewhere, depending on the size of the audit, and planning what they're going to do before they come to you. So by the time they come to your firm, they know exactly who's going to go where, who will do what information to ask for, what information to look at, what information to document. All of that is part of the audit plan, which is always a good idea. Trying to go into a firm helter-skelter, quote unquote, is a bad idea. No auditor should do it. Hence the whole discussion on the audit plan, believe it or not. Notice AAS1 states that the auditor should plan his work. Now, folks, for the purposes of our class, his means her. Okay, so don't panic. The auditor should plan his work to enable him to conduct an effective audit in an efficient and timely manner. See? So this plan is not just a peace of mind. This plan is so that the auditors can get in there, do the job well, do it quickly, and get out. Because they have other audits to do. And they cannot spend that resources at one particular place going over the required time, and then the other engagement starts to suffer. Okay? So they want to plan to get in there and get out as quickly as possible without doing a shabby job. That's the point. These plans should, of course, start with the auditor's knowledge of the business they're going to audit. In other words, if you're asked to do an audit on a particular type of business and you're not familiar with doing audits for that business, you should probably respectfully decline as an audit firm. Just say we don't have that experience on staff. Let somebody else do it. But of course, some people are so interested in getting that money, they forget they have an obligation to say whether or not they have the capability to conduct a certain type of audit. If you're not, it's for example, let's take a doctor. We have all kinds of doctors, don't we? We have general practitioners, we have cardiologists, we have pediatricians, orthodontists, and all kinds of different kinds of doctors. And so if we have a doctor who specializes in open heart surgery, and we have a doctor who's a general practitioner that only puts the thing to your chest and nothing else, when the time calls for open heart surgery, we're not going to say, well, we'll take any doctor, even though they're all doctors. In fact, you might get an academic doctor from the College of the Bahamas or some university that has nothing to do with medicine at all, or worse still, a doctor of religion. All they could do is come in and pray for you, but they cannot open up your chest and conduct an open heart surgery. So the point we're making is auditors should be prepared. If they don't have the skills and the experience to deal with a certain type of audit, they should respectfully decline. Okay? And this is part, this too again is part of the audit process for acquiring knowledge of the accounting of the company. If the company is not a company they can audit sufficiently, they should decline it. But let's assume that they can.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
You see how you say because auditors want to be greedy, right? Sometimes.
Yes.
When you refer to that, are you referring to the company or the actual individual auditors? Because even though their overall, like, how can I say this, they make 5 million from doing the audit of this company, is it divided individually between those auditors who actually went there, or does it come to the company and then everyone has like a set pay that they get?
Yeah,
Or
that's a good point, and I'm happy you're getting that sorted out in your mind because here's what happens when the audit firm itself is a whole firm of auditors where you have a bunch of junior, seniors, and partners in the audit firm. When they go out to do an audit, the money that they collect, all of it goes into the auditing firm's bank account. And out of it, they pay salaries to individuals just like any other company. You follow? So nobody has an individual incentive. When the audit firm bills a company for the audit, they will say the audit will cost you $10 million, and that $10 million goes into the auditor's bank account, and the auditors will use that money to pay its expenses like any other company. Do you follow that? So it's not an individual situation at all, because an audit firm operates like any other company in terms of invoice.
Mhm.
An audit firm operates like any other company in terms like invoicing businesses for services provided and then putting the money in the account to cover its expenses, including salaries and anything else it has to pay. Make sense? India?
So are
Yeah.
audit firms audited themselves?
No, absolutely not. Which is
I mean,
another.
when I say if they are audited themselves, or do they have to be audited by another auditing company?
Well, we have what we call an audit oversight entity in the United States, for example, where we say the auditors are being audited by another group of auditors. What happens is they don't go in and conduct necessarily a full-scale audit like what an auditing firm might do with a financial institution or other company. But this audit oversight body will require the auditing firms to submit certain kinds of information, to submit documentation about their audit plans and how they execute their audits and the results. We'll look at audit opinions and samples and other stuff to see if the auditing company is applying the auditing rules to the audits of firms. So yes, we do have an oversight company that monitors auditing firms to seek to ensure that they are following through with generally accepted auditing principles and they're not doing anything in the audit process that will hurt their clients. Okay? Absolutely. That was not always the case. But in recent years, auditors have been taking bribes, hanky-panky, doing sloppy audits from time to time, getting too cozy with management, whatever the case might be, in the board. And the audits didn't go well, giving opinions that were not necessarily true, and so on for whatever reason. Bribery, promises to come back, make more money, whatever the case might be, which should never happen with any auditing firm. But a couple have fallen prey to money. And like the best of us, they got overtaken by the desire to earn more money. And so as a result of that, in the United States, for example, the UK and Canada, they have these audit oversight boards. And so they review the work and activities of the auditing firms. Auditing firms do not particularly like it, but they don't have any choice. because the oversight body is established by the government, and the government's decision takes precedence over whatever the auditing firm might feel or think. All right, so in planning, the first thing the auditor considers, do I know this company well enough to do this audit? The answer is yes, they proceed with the plan. Next thing they look at, we need to go and find out how the client's accounting system works. What are their internal control procedures and policies? See, again, they have the fundamental training experience, but every company is unique. Okay, it's just like if you date, you ladies in the room, if you're dating, say, God forbid, two guys at the same time. They are two guys, and they may have some similar characteristics, like a heavy voice or some other guy stuff. But just make sure and know that they're not the same people. They have different personalities, different interests, and all kinds of other differences. Okay? But sometimes and most times go way beyond their similarities, male or female. And so the auditor is like that when they go into a firm. They can't say, we audited Royal Bank, Scotiabank should be a breeze. That's not the correct way for them to look at it, just because both of them are major banks in the Bahamas. They have to go into Scotiabank or the other financial institution and review their accounting system, which could be very different from the accounting system of the bank they just did a few months ago. That's the point. And their controls and their procedures. Okay? That's all part of the audit plan. Okay? They have to determine, can we rely on the internal control procedures of the company we're going to audit? If the answer is yes, then they don't have to do so much work. The answer is no, then they have to dig deeper in all the paper and all the transactions because they cannot trust the controls of the company, and therefore they cannot rely on them to be correct. So now the auditor has to dig deeper and do more work, stay there longer, and companies to pay more, which is why the internal control process is so important for companies to make sure that they are doing at least the basic things. I mentioned some of them earlier, internal controls. Can anybody remember one internal control I mentioned?
When you say the internal control, oh God, I think you was meaning like if you have one person doing everything like that.
Exactly like that. That's a internal control failure of the worst kind. It's amazing. Some companies are still doing that in the 21st century. Whenever that happens, be ready. People are going to steal from you. No doubt
So,
about it.
so internal control in that way would be to have different staff doing different stuff.
Absolutely. Just like on the job where you are, perhaps. Different
Hmm.
people are doing different things for the same reason. For example, if you work at a bank, if a teller has a certain transaction, they can't approve it. They have to go to tell a supervisor, correct?
Right.
That's called an internal control. Because if the teller can approve everything, then the teller will do all kinds of crap and don't have to go to anybody. And when that happens, all kinds of weird things will happen as a result. Some people are honest, you don't have to worry about it. Others are not. The problem is we can't tell who is honest and who is not just by looking at people, can we?
Right.
No. And therefore, these internal controls are designed to quote unquote keep everybody honest. And even with all that, people still find ways around the bloody system.
This that same story that I told you about that place where I used to work where they were removing the counterfoils and telling people the system were down. That person was doing everything. That person was tellering, doing the overrides, was checking the reports. That person was doing every single thing.
Absolutely major control failure. And any company that allows that to happen to any extent is setting themselves up for losses. Now, if you happen to have an honest employee doing everything, God bless you and the brown bag with the comforters in them. But I can assure you, sooner or later, just as we have people with integrity, we do have others who have no integrity. Problem is, we cannot tell by looking at them. And so these controls are put in place to make sure or try to ensure that everybody is operating above board. Okay? So yeah, these are all parts of the audit plan. If you notice the list of audit planning procedures, it's not a long list, but it's an important list. So the audit looks at, do we know this company well enough? Find out about the accounting system, find out about the internal controls. Um, what is our timing going to be? When are we going to go and how long are we going to stay? What things are we going to review? How are we going to coordinate the work? Who's going to do what, when, and why? All of these part of the auditing plan. Okay. How far into the company should we review? Should we review every piece of paper, which is impossible? Should we review only key transactions, high balances, and so on? These are all part of the audit plan. Okay? That auditors arrange before they come into your office to conduct their audits. Okay? And again, if you're not an auditor by profession, then you don't have to worry so much about the details of the audit plan. But the information is still important for anybody who works in any kind of firm, because the more you understand in principle about what's going on, the better you can do your job from day to day, help somebody do their jobs from day to day. And when auditors come in, you'll understand the language of the auditor just because you've done stuff like this. You're like, I don't want to be a professional auditor. That's not why you're doing this course. You're doing this course so that you can understand the language of the auditor, the process of the audit. If you're responsible for transactions and stuff in your firm, that you will know that those transactions are subject to scrutiny. If you're a supervisor or manager, that you will know that you need to be checking your staff to make sure that they're following the policies and procedures and the internal controls and so on. The list goes on and on as to why you do a course like this. And none of them has to do with being a professional auditor, because that's not why you're here. It's be able to help you do all the other things that you do within your firm more effectively. And if you're really keen, you'll find too that a lot of this will help you in your personal life. If only you have the ability to pull out and apply when necessary. That's the beauty of information and knowledge. That's why you pay money and come and sit down and go through this crazy stuff. And again, for the moment, you probably only can sleep on, oh God, all this information I have to remember to study all of that. I don't want to study. And I have to pay for this. If I had my money, I could have gone to Fort Lauderdale, whatever the case might be. But I can assure you, in due season, you'd be like, you know what? Pretty happy I did that, or that, or that. Okay? For sure. All right, so that's the audit plan. Closely following the audit plan is the objective. Now, what do we mean by objective? Well, we have a whole other little short list here of audit objectives. Okay? And they're about what? Giving attention to the important areas of the audit. If you find any problems, fix them quickly. See, those are audit objectives. And that's why we set objectives. It's like two young people getting married, and they say, okay, the plan is to have a wedding, and then after the wedding, we'll set our objectives. And so after you get married, come back from the honeymoon, that's the plan has been executed. You're married now, you're stuck with each other for life and all that. Okay, now you can start planning the objectives for the way forward. See, that same principle. And so you and your spouse sit down and say, okay, there'll be no more than 2 children born in this house. In other words, we don't want more children we can afford to look after and send to college and all that crazy stuff. Okay? That's an objective. We are not going to fight physically ever, ever, ever. We're going to discuss everything. That's an objective. We're going to keep family members out of our personal business because it's not their business. That's an objective. Same as the audit objective. How about that? I have young couples that come to me often about those kinds of objectives. They've just gotten married. They see I have white hair. They say, oh, you've been married for a long time. I'm like, yeah, very long time. Don't ask me how long. A very long time. And so they want, then you can get, I'm like, what would you say is would be good advice for young married people? I guess they were probably getting ready to set objectives, same as the auditor. Okay? And saying, make sure you love each other. That's the first thing, because if you don't do that, then everything else is just sinking sand. That's the first thing. And I hope by the time the planning is over, you got married, you've established that as part of the planning process before you get married. That's the first problem. But assuming that that's done, then the next thing you do is never lose respect for each other. See, that's the other thing. Oh, what do you mean by respect? Then you have a discussion. And then thirdly, but not finally, keep other people out of your marriage, family members included. Do not, it's not their business. Doesn't mean you don't love your mommy and daddy anymore. You do. But you have to leave your mommy and daddy and cleave to each other now. Make your own family. Okay, now your extended family, you're getting married to make your own. But a lot of times, some people keep family tied up, and then family starts getting mucky and murky. Everybody knows everybody's business. Yeah, I know what about him, or I know. Man, it gets stinky. Okay, just thought I'd throw that in case we have any youngsters planning to get married. All right, so the audit objective then, as you can see, is very clear and very particular. Okay? Find the problems, resolve them quickly. Do the work expeditiously. The sooner you finish, the sooner you can get out of the firm, get on to the next audit. Remember, time is money for auditors too. They can't hang out in your firm forever waiting for you to find files that should have been right in the filing cabinet every day. And we'll get it for you by next week. Next week comes up, we haven't found it yet. It's probably the dog must have run off with it. No, the parakeet, whatever the case, they can't. Time is money for auditors as well. And the sooner they, and part of their objective is to get in, do your work expeditiously and quickly, and give attention to everything that's important and get out of there. And notice the one before the end, use the audit assistants properly. In other words, you have the foot soldiers, find them out to do the legwork and tell them to do it quickly and accurately. And make sure you're coordinating the work. Don't just throw them into the firm and go walk off and play golf or go shopping in the mall if you're a female auditor. No. When you put them in the field, the junior auditors, you have to, part of your objective should be to coordinate their work and make sure that they're getting everything done according to plan. See, according to plan. Notice the steps. We plan first, and now we have the objectives. Wow. Remember, the audit plan will consider certain things like how difficult is the audit potentially, how complex is it, what is the environment of the entity, what type of business we're going in. Is it a hostile environment? Are the people friendly? Do they have a reputation for being honest or dishonesty? All of these things are intangible stuff that's part of the audit plan and the audit objectives, even before the auditor comes into your firm. Imagine that. And this is required for every single audit that is being done. If an auditing firm wants to be successful. And again, why is this important to you, non-auditors? Because the more you understand the auditor's responsibility, the more you can ensure that you're doing things within your firm to make that job as easy as possible for the auditor, help everybody in the process to make sure they're doing their jobs correctly, timely, and promptly, and get the auditors in and out as quickly as possible. How about that? That's why you do this crap. Not crap, you know what I mean? Stuff. So when you see staff members not following policy, excuse me, that's not the policy. Because you know when the auditors come in, they're going to be checking that. Mary, this is the 17th error for the week. What's happening? Are you not getting enough rest? Are you not careful enough? See, because now you're the supervisor, you're her colleague on the next side of, you've done this thing, this course kind of thing. So now you're a little more aware. Like, really now? I don't think so. And this is what it does. It heightens your awareness of the responsibilities of everybody in the firm. Long even before the auditors come in to do your audit. And when they come in, persons who've done stuff like this can listen, communicate, understand, and move the audit process along far more efficiently than if you didn't have any of this information. Be just like hanging around like whatever, whatever they say. I don't understand it. For you guys, next audit, internal or external, man, you'll be following them to see like what the hell's going on. At least I can remember some stuff I did. Questioning stuff, saying to the auditor, because now you have information. Just like the questions you've been asking throughout these sessions so far. Very critical question. That means you're already beginning to expand your thoughts. And that's the whole idea. So, in planning the audit and your objectives, we said already, how complex is the audit? Find out if you can and make the necessary adjustment. If it's a simple audit, don't send a gang of auditors in, send them to somewhere else. If it's a complex audit, send your best people in who understands the process so they can get in, do it quickly, and get out. Understand the environment where you work. What are they doing? Are they computerized or not? Are they fully computerized or partially computerized? What is the nature of the internal controls? Are there any at all? If they are they working? How much of it do we need to test? See, that's what we mean by environment. What's the atmosphere like in this firm you're going to audit? Have you had any previous experience with the client? See? The answer is yes, then the audit should go a little easier. The answer is no, then the audit is not going to go that easy because now you need to get to know your new client. Getting to know anything for the first time is always challenging. Okay? That's okay. That's part and parcel of the deal. So again, if I were to say to you, describe 3 or 4 factors that need to be considered when planning the audit, then like again, it's not going to be difficult. It just depends on what you've actually reviewed and noted and so on. And if you notice, a lot of my notes are set in a way that you can almost determine, not that everything is not important, but you can look at certain things just the way I have them set up and say, you know what, this bloody lecture is going to ask me something about these factors in planning because he has them listed: complexity, environment, previous experience, knowledge, see, like that. Certainly, those are things that I considered when I was a student. Let me see what I could figure out. Because oftentimes lecturers don't say, well, you get to study this, but not that. Leave that out. Don't. It happens.
So
But not,
let me ask you this: if you ask us this question and you say list them of the factors, would you just want us to list them, or we have to give a little definition or explanation, like how you have here listed?
yeah, good question. Okay, now you're getting into the nitty gritty of it. Ah, I might ask it several different ways. I might say list them. If I say list them, then all you need to do is list them. Now, if I say list and describe, then you need to list it and say something about it. Do you follow?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good question. In fact, you don't even know how good a question that is yet. Very good question. Because a lot of students get tied up because they don't really get the difference between the two. Okay. So sometimes I'd say list 4 factors and they list them and give me a long written thing I didn't ask for. Then sometimes I'd say list and describe. Then they'd give me a list and nothing else. So they lose points on the description side of things. And then when they come back and say, but did you say, I said, I read the question again, list and describe. Okay. Very important. Little examination hint. All right. So the audit planning involves all those things. Where does the audit get the information from? Source of information? Well, according to auditing standards, the audit should obtain a level of information from the client's business. Again, go back to that for a reason. The more you know about the client's business, the better you can conduct your audit, like anything else. The more you know about your spouse, the better you can get along. The more you know about the job you do at work, the better you can do the job. The same principle. Okay, that's the whole idea. That's what we mean by getting the information that you need to help you to identify what's going in the firm, the transactions in the business, and so that you can make judgment calls about certain things that are going on based on that information. Okay? Where can the auditor get this information? a whole lot of places. I've listed a couple of them here for you. The annual report has information about the company. Auditors need to pick it up and read it. Minutes, shareholder minutes, board of directors minutes, committee minutes. Auditors need to read them, preferably before the audit, or if not before, very quickly after they get in, while everybody's sleeping up at night reading that. Because the more you read them, the more you find out about what makes the company tick and what the hell is really going on. Okay. Wow. Financial reports for the previous periods and budgets, whatever. If they have them, look at them. If there are any working papers from audits from previous years and other related files from audits, look at them. This is all about getting information. Who are the people in that firm? Who's responsible for what? How many departments? What type of departments do you have? Accounting, finance, HR, marketing, legal, and the list goes on. The auditors needs to be aware of these things. How are they connected? Are they getting along? When was the last time there was a fight in the organization? Or whatever the case might be. All of these are important things for auditors to know. Sit down and talk to the client, meaning the board of directors. See what their thoughts are, what their plans are for the future. What are they projecting for the company? All of this stuff is about learning about the company and getting information. Remember, like everything else, the more information the auditor gets, the better he or she can do their jobs. Is there a manual? Where is it? Look at it. Don't read it in detail because you don't have time, but look at the structure, see what's in the table of contents. Go look at key stuff. Find out what is supposed to be governing this business. Check out publications, check out media, Google, wherever you need to go about this company going to audit. You might find out some interesting things. See? All of this is part of the auditor's work. It has nothing to do with you people who are in the firm waiting for auditors to come in. But how nice it is to know a little bit about the auditor's responsibilities. For sure. Wow. Visit the premises before the audit starts. If they have subsidiaries or branches or locations other than the head office, visit them. See what's there. If you pick up a financial statement and the company says it has $10 million in equipment, then you need to ask, where's the $10 million of equipment? And they say, don't worry about it. It's here, there, and everywhere. What should you do, anyone? Let's say I'm an auditor and I say, where's the equipment? And then you tell me, here, there, and everywhere. What should I do as an auditor? Should I just say, okay? Anyone?
No,
Why shouldn't I just say, okay?
because I put in more work on you. Then you gotta go dig up and all that stuff.
Well, I don't mind digging up as the auditor. My concern is I asked them where the equipment is that's worth 10 million, and they say, don't worry about it. It's around. Why would that concern the auditor?
Because that's a lot of money value of the equipment. You
And
wouldn't
that-
just around everywhere.
Well, part of the auditor's job is to verify, isn't it?
Yes.
In other words, the auditor can't just take the word of the people in the firm. If that's the case, you don't need an audit. When the auditor comes in and says, where's the 10 million of equipment, the auditor expects you to take him to where the equipment is and prove that that's $10 million worth of equipment. Because some companies lie. They say they have X amount of dollars in equipment, and when you check it out as an auditor, the equipment doesn't even exist. Did you know that? Probably not. Because you believe that people in firms are all honest. They are not. Auditing students, management of firms and boards lie. Remember, did we talk about cooking the books?
Yeah, we did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. What did we say cooking the books was?
Undervaluating and overvaluating.
That's one form of it, but in general, cooking the books means what? Making financial statement looks better than they really are.
Yeah, window dressing or something like that.
Yeah.
Window
window
dressing.
Yes. Cooking the books and window dressing are the same. So if I ask you to describe the nature of window dressing or what is it, everybody in here should be able to tell me that. I hope I include that in the test. But even if I don't, it's an important thing to know. Window dressing is fraudulent. Did you know that? It's false reporting. It's lying by management. Happens more often than you think. Just because people are walking around in suits and skirt suits and all that stuff, you think they're all honest? They're not all honest. My. I just said it that way so you could remember. But the truth is they're not. That's the whole point. That's why you have auditors come in as well. Not to prove who's dishonest, but to make sure that things are going the way they should. And if you find a couple of dishonest people along the way, it's the auditor's job to expose them.
Okay, so question. When we then all of us and pass this course, right?
Uh-huh.
So this can help us get a job and make more money?
This course?
Yes, sir.
Well, again, getting a job is a very interesting concept, isn't it, Gretchen? Let me put it this way.
Yes, it
If
is.
you have, yeah, if you have this on your resume that you've done an auditing class and you're out looking for a job, it will definitely enhance your position in terms of possibly getting the job, as opposed to not having it on your resume. Do you follow? Because when, depending on where you go for a job, and they look at your resume and they say fundamentals of auditing, Bahamas Institute of Financial Services, is well, first of all, we have somebody who is prepared to sit down and learn new stuff. That might encourage somebody to hire you. And secondly, I might say, we were looking for somebody who wants to learn new stuff. Because this gang we have here, a bunch of lazy persons who don't want to do anything except collect a paycheck and go home. So yes, new learning always enhances your potential. Now, if you want proof of that, there's proof everywhere. But I'll give you a simple example, just as a form of encouragement, hopefully, in case you're wondering about it. A million years ago, when I was 19 years old, I went to stand on the line at the old College of the Bahamas, now UB, to register for my first accounting class. At that time, my salary was $60 per week. And so I had to take the salary and borrow money to pay for the courses, which were not very expensive, but they were expensive for me then. And I had to do them at night from 6 to 10 o'clock because I had to work during the day. And so I'm sitting on this line, long line as usual. Nothing has changed apparently. Waiting to turn in all the money to that I have in life. Signing up for a course that I don't know when it's going to be of any benefit or any benefit at all. And wondering, what the hell am I doing? Let me take my $60 and a couple whatever and go back home and go to sleep. Put it in the bank and see what happens. But no, here I'm paying all my money away, wondering, how in the hell is this one or two accounting courses going to help me? Well, many decades later, it has come back to help me in more ways than I can imagine. And I'm just telling you that to encourage you to continue learning. This and anything else you learn will always be of benefit to you. Whether you're looking for a new job, whether you're on your existing job and looking to move up in the organization, etc. Keep on trucking. It only looks like it's not going anywhere, but it is. New learning, never a waste of time. How do I know? Been there, done that. Okay? All right. So the auditor then has to do all of this information checking, so that they can find out as much as they can about their client so that when they go into the firm, they'll be ready, quote unquote, as ready as they can be in terms of executing a successful audit. Planning, planning, planning. In addition to getting information and finding out about management in the company, he also has to plan the terms of his engagement. In other words, how long is it going to go for? Is it going to be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, whatever the case might be? Does the auditor have any statutory responsibilities that they have to make provisions for in terms of sending a special report to the government or anywhere else? Do they have to send anything to the creditor of the company, etc.? All of these are all part of the planning process. Wow. And it is absolutely necessary that all of this is done prior to going into the firm or as quickly as possible after getting into the firm. And then when you get into the firm, you have to find out all of the things that are significant within the firm for audit purposes, what audit pronouncements and guidelines affect that particular firm. Because remember, depending on the industry you go into, auditors go into all kinds of industry, financial, construction, shipping, all kinds of industries, whatever they might be, retailing, wholesaling, manufacturing. All of these places require audits in one form or another eventually. Okay? So the auditors' work can be very diversified, or in some cases very specialized. The point is they can't do it successfully without a plan. And even in all the planning, let's not forget, they have to set the materiality levels. Remember our earlier discussion? The materiality levels. When we go into this audit, what would we consider to be material and what would we not consider to be material? How about that? What are we going to pay special attention to? Are we going to be looking specifically for fraud and error, or are we just going to see what happens? We'll conduct our audits, and then if we run into them, we'll make the appropriate notations. All of these things are determined in advance. Okay.
So that's something that I wanted to ask. Like, say, so now you're talking about junior auditors. I'm assuming that those young people who I see coming into my work are junior auditors. So, who does the audit plan and their supervisors, and with the supervisor or the more experienced auditor set the threshold for materiality, or they would leave that up to the discretion of the junior auditors?
Good question. The audit supervisor or the audit manager will set the thresholds, not the junior auditors. Okay? The junior auditors will learn how to set thresholds over time as they interact with their supervisors who are in fact responsible for setting the thresholds and the major planning and coordination of the junior auditors. So basically, the junior auditors are the frontliners, the foot soldiers. They go out there and they get all busted by doing all the dirty work, so to speak, checking the files, checking the details, checking transactions, vouching, which we're going to see here in a minute, and all that stuff. But as far as setting materiality levels and planning the audit processes and procedures, those are done by audit seniors, okay, who have more experience, yes. And so where are the junior auditors? They're right here where we are, vouching. What do you think vouching is? Or what do you think a voucher is, sorry?
I mean, the form where they got to fill out, like the turn in, like if they're doing stuff.
Well, it could be something you fill out and turn in, but a voucher has information on it. Yes, it's a form with information. And so the junior auditors will check to see if the information is correct for particular types of transactions. Okay. For example, the junior auditor might, first of all, check to see if the date of the voucher falls within the accounting period. He said, why is that important? Because sometimes persons in the firm might accidentally or deliberately give you a voucher with last year's date. It doesn't
Not
apply.
only that, from experience, I noticed recently, and sometimes it don't fall within the procedures, the internal control procedures and policies. All I just have to check for.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because sometimes people, again, some persons accidentally or because they don't have the knowledge, they oversight, they overlook it, and others do some things very deliberately to circumvent certain auditing requirements or to try and to not get the auditor to see certain things. Believe it or not, some persons and firms try to hide stuff from auditors if they could, depending on what's going on, what they're doing. And sometimes they have the blessings of senior management in some cases, depending on how serious the hide is. Sometimes the auditors find it, sometimes they don't.
Sometimes, Mr. Wilkinson, they just don't be following the policies and procedures. Sometimes some things some people just slack.
Of course, they don't. And many of them slack because they're just slack and lazy and don't want to follow the procedures. And many of them slack, so to speak, because they were not trained properly in the first place in terms of what they should do. And the question of policy review and all that doesn't even come up. Some supervisor says this is the way to do it, and so therefore they do exactly the way that person says, which may not necessarily be the correct way because the supervisor is not following the policy and procedure in many cases, believe it or not. Okay, so yeah, making sure the voucher is in the correct accounting period, that it is made out in the client's name. See, all these little things that seem unimportant have to be checked because people are always changing stuff so that they can get away with money. Make sure the voucher or document is authorized by the appropriate person or persons. Make sure it has all the relevant information. Wow. Make sure, in short, that it is complete. That's it. Make sure that the account in which the voucher is adjusted is properly prepared and posted to and documented so that when it gets to the final accounts in the general ledger, the information is correct. That's why we check all these details. Make sure that a check that is supposed to be for $500 doesn't have 5,000. Make sure that the quantity requisition is supposed to be for 300 units does not end up accidentally or on purpose having 3,000 units, because folks know that the checker is not really checking, or they distract them about something else, and then they sign here and say, "You remember what happened? What happened last night? You had anything to drink?" And while you're signing, you're not looking. People watch these things to see who is who, and you'd be surprised if you're not checking things properly, what folks will actually do to get away with whatever their programs might be. Notice we are told in terms of controls, after an examination of the voucher is over, each voucher should be what? Stamped. So that it may not be what? Why wouldn't it be stamped, anyone?
Verify the date.
So
That's
that
what,
we cannot use it again.
yeah, so you
As
can't
part of
use it.
And that it was processed.
Absolutely, it's processed, you can't use it again. But some people have some things going on. You don't stamp that, they'll use it again, present it as another thing, and it's the same thing as already been presented. You'll be surprised. Okay? The point is, the auditor cannot take anything for granted. And the point is, persons who are working in the firm from day to day shouldn't be taking it for granted either. But unfortunately, you always have somebody who has something going on. And that something is not always legal, and that something is not always ethical, unfortunately. Because if everybody was legal and ethical and forthright, there'd be no need for auditors. Unless, of course, all they're doing is coming in to see if you're not committing any errors. For sure. But because all these other things are going on, we have to stay on our P's and Q's. So that's the audit plan. Now we have the audit program. What in the world is the audit program? We are told right in the second line or third line on both. Anybody see it? The audit program is what? Let me see who's following. The audit program is? We're looking at the meaning of audit program. That's the heading. And on the second and third line, they tell us what the audit program is. What is it?
It consists of a series of verification procedures to be applied to the financial statements and accounts of a company contains sufficient evidence to enable the auditor to express an informed opinion on the statements.
Okay. Who agrees or disagrees with that? She's definitely onto something. Well, we'll see very shortly exactly what she means. But before we get to that particular point, we are told, I think around page 6 or whatever, under the meaning of audit program, that it is nothing but a list of examination and verification steps. It's a list of examination and verification steps to be applied to the audit process. That's all. In other words, can I see the cash general ledger, please? We
So
examine
the
it.
audit program would be in the audit plan.
It'll be a part of the audit plan, yes. The audit plan will include the program, and the program is simply examining and verifying the audit steps, meaning making sure that what it's supposed to be is. That's all it is. Audit program is a fancy name for that process. Not that that process is not important, it's absolutely critical. In fact, it's the nuts and bolts part of the audit. Not that anything else is less important, but this examination verification, see, verification means you're proving whether or not its information is true and correct. And that is very important in the audit process because the auditor needs to be satisfied that they've come across enough true and correct so that when they give their opinion, they can be satisfied that their opinion can be substantiated by enough checks that says, yes, what they said it was, it was. That's the point. That's what the examination and verification in the audit program is all about. Checking to see if the information is given in the company accounts are true and correct. If the auditor finds most of them to be so, they are going to probably give you an unqualified audit, all things being considered. But if they keep finding stuff that is not so, they try to verify something and 50% are true and 50%, 25% are false and 25% cannot be found. That's a big problem for the auditor. The audit program, verifying the information in the accounts. See that? It's not complex. Once you start unwinding it, it becomes like, oh, that's what the hell an audit program is. They made it seem like it's the world coming to an end. It's not the world coming to an end. Doesn't mean it's a frivolous exercise either. Because remember, depending on the type of entity you are auditing, this audit program, this verification process can be anything from very simple to extremely complex. That's the point. All right. So while we're doing this, while we're running this audit program, doing these checks, a couple of things the auditor needs to be aware of, and I listed them for you. Whatever your audit assignment is, stay within the limitations of your assignment. Don't go off into the deep on issues that are unrelated to your audit assignment. Find the best evidence that you can to support your opinion at the end of the day. In other words, if the company was supposed to pay off an outstanding account and they said they did, you should be able to check the cash account to see that $30,000 went out to make the payment and that the accounts payable account has been reduced by $30,000 because the account is now paid in full. That's what the auditor is verifying, and specifically verifying those kinds of transactions for medium and large size transactions. Doesn't mean the auditor isn't concerned about smaller transactions, they are. But of course, if the real problems are in the huge amounts of money, they certainly want to know that they've started there in order to get the best evidence to prove that everything is in order. Only apply steps and procedures that can help you to verify the information. Do not use or apply or get involved in any transactions that are not related to just verifying that the information is true and correct. Keep it simple but effective. Number 4, please take note, consider all possibilities of error. So you're not going in looking for it, but it's in the back of your mind at all times that an error could occur anywhere during your audit program, during your verification process. For sure. And of course, if there are any related issues pertaining to the area that you're auditing, please be aware of them. And when you come across them, if you're not clear on what to do or what they are as a junior auditor, you do what? Refer it to your supervisor. Simple as that. Now, right under there, I have a very interesting paragraph. And it goes something like this. Anybody see that paragraph? Right underneath, the one that says, what is best evidence? Anybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So can somebody just read that paragraph for me before we go on? What is best evidence?
What is the best evidence for testing the accuracy of any assertion is a matter for expert knowledge and advice. Evidence. This is the primary task before the auditor when he draws up the audit program. Transactions vary in nature and impact. Procedures to be prescribed depend on prior knowledge of what evidence is reasonably available in respect of each transaction.
So you see, again, all of these things are considered prior to going in and actually conducting the audit. Interestingly enough, a lot of work is done during the audit, but I think we all understand now that a whole lot of work is done when? Before the audit. Okay? The planning process. And it only reminds us about how we should plan things if we want to be effective in our own jobs and our own responsibility. The same principle applies. Okay? Plan it, plan it, plan it to the greatest possible extent. You can imagine what the auditor's life will be without all these plans we discussed. It would be a nightmare. Okay? And I suspect that there's some firms here and there who try to circumvent some of these planning processes. And I suspect that many of them suffer the consequences of doing that. For sure. Okay? All right. So that brings me to the point of the advantages and the disadvantages of the audit program. Does anybody remember what I said the audit program was?
Basically, a verification of the steps to make sure that everything is true and correct.
Absolutely. That's all it is. Don't lose any more sleep when you have a term audit program like, do I have to be a professional, whatever it is, to understand what an audit program is? The answer is no. It's a very simple concept in terms of verifying the information that you came in to check, making sure to see if it's true and correct. I don't know why I gave you this long list of advantages, but the list is long. And the disadvantages has a shorter list, which is good. You don't mind having a longer list of advantages. You just don't want to have a longer list of disadvantages. Okay? So you can see right off the top what the advantages of the audit program are for the auditor. Okay? And usually, who's doing this work? The audit assistant, the junior auditor. And here's what happens. Setting up a program lets the junior auditor know what the instructions are. Here are your instructions, and here's what to do. Go in and take every account in the general ledger and check all the balances over $500. See, very clear instructions. So when that auditor busts in that firm, the only thing they can see is general ledger accounts with balances over 500, and they want to check them. And they will ask you for them. And they will diligently check them if they're doing their jobs properly all day, every day until they're done. That's one of the huge benefits of the program. It assigns people to what they have to do, and they don't have to pitter patter around trying to figure out what is my job for today. Okay. Programs provides perspectives. It lets everybody know what you'll be looking at and how to proceed. Programs allow you to determine which juniors to select for which jobs. Because typically, audit seniors have some idea generally of the capability of their juniors, their commitment to work, their concentration levels, and all this kind of stuff. So they assign them to work based on their nature, characteristics, talent, experience. See? That's what the audit program does, allows you to do these things before they find out to go ahead and do the checks. Okay. Under a properly framed program, the danger is significantly less and audit can proceed systematically. If you have a plan, you can go in and do a better job. If you don't have a plan, then chances are you're going to mess things up. Okay? That is the essence. Somebody's mic is open. That is the essence of D. Okay? Notice a whole lot of discussion. The advantages are to the assistants and the juniors. Okay? One of the other advantages that is noted in E is that when the junior or assistant, audit assistant does this work, they have specific programs and procedures to follow. When they have done that work, they can sign off saying that they have done that work, and therefore they can take responsibility for that work, and the work can be traced back to the audit assistant. Okay? Huge benefits to audit seniors in terms of trying to keep control of who's doing what, when, and why. Okay? So these are some of the key advantages of having such an audit program. And now that we know what an audit program is, we can then understand why these advantages exist. Okay? Serves as a guide for the next year. So in other words, if you have an audit program set up this year, next year when you come in, you tweak it, see? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can use that as a guide for next year's audit. Any new people that might join the team next year's audit, that information is there. They can use it as a point of reference. So you see the benefits are humongous. H, and finally, the final advantage is when an audit program is properly drawn up or written up, it serves as evidence, see, in the event of any charge of negligence. In other words, if somebody decides to sue the audit firm, these programs that are completed, filled in, checked, and signed off by the auditors will be evidence that the work was done and that the company or whoever is bringing suit cannot say that the auditor did not carry out the audit procedures. Because these programs will clearly say what the procedures were, who carried them out, who signed them off as being completed, etc. Huge benefit in the case of a lawsuit. And there have been quite a few lawsuits against auditing firms. Okay. Some auditing firms are even sued because they're blamed for causing the company to go bankrupt. And in fact, the auditor was nowhere around when the board was making bad decisions about the future of the company. But because the company decided to go belly up, right, shortly after the audit, many firms oftentimes try to blame the audit firm. Doesn't mean some audit firms are not sloppy sometimes, but generally speaking, they try to do a good job, God forbid. What is the first disadvantage? Let's look at one of them. What is the first disadvantage that is given? Anyone?
The work may become mechanical, and parts of the program may be carried out without any understanding of how said parts relate to the audit team.
Absolutely. The problem with the program is it's predetermined. Everything is pretty much set up in advance. And all you need to do is go and tick the boxes and make sure you cover all the items in the box or on the program. Okay? That's all well and good. You get things done properly. After a while, people become people and they become bored with the process because they
Karen, I think your mic is open. We can hear your background.
sure can. Somebody's falling down. Okay, great. Fantastic. So yes, the audit plan is predetermined, already set up, tick the boxes, sign off, and everybody's happy. That's all well and good, but human nature being what it is, after a while people become bored with all that ticking the box. And then they start closing their eyes and just ticking the box or ticking anything in the box, or God forbid, what can happen after it becomes too mechanical for some people and they start to go crazy just ticking the box on the audit plan that is already predetermined. So we have to be careful we don't get so bored because the process is so mechanical that we start doing it ineffectively, which of course eventually will hurt the audit. Audits, audit programs, because they're already predetermined and pre-scheduled, they are considered sometimes to be too rigid and inflexible. People don't have time to, don't have an opportunity to set their own parameters. If the business changes program of conduct, they need to go back and redo the entire audit program because there's no room for flexibility. The old thing has to be thrown out, a new thing has to be done because you cannot do any adjustments anywhere, and so on. So these are some disadvantages. Interesting in C, one of the disadvantages that inefficient assistants may take shelter behind the program. In other words, they might say, I'm defending my deficiency and what I do be on the grounds that no instructions in the matter is contained. In other words, they're saying, okay, the other program is already pre-done. There isn't anything you're telling me what to do. If I mess it up, well, it's not my fault. It's somebody else's fault who does not have the instructions connected to the process. Okay? So, and this of course applies to inefficient assistants, those who are not doing a great job typically, but they'll find a reason to defend themselves. Okay? Audit programs have a way of killing initiative. They're already pre-done. Nothing for you to create, nothing for auditors to do on their own, so to speak, to feel a part of the process, to make adjustments here and there. And the recommendations they make, depending on what it is, may or may not be accepted because seniors do not want to change the program because it means going into the system and revamping stuff. The point is, it can kill initiative by young auditors. They go in all excited. After a while, they find out and realize they're just ticking the boxes. Man, this ticking the box is killing me. Why can't I be given some work where I have to think, make decisions, make recommendations, whatever the case might be? And that's understandable, but it doesn't change the fact that the audit program process is very important to getting the job done quickly, efficiently, and effectively. Notice, before we get to the working papers, we are told that all of these disadvantages may be eliminated by imaginative supervision of the work carried out by the assistants. How about that? I wonder how that works. The auditor must have a receptive attitude as regards the assistants. The assistant should be encouraged to observe matters objectively and bring sufficient matters to the notice of the supervisor or principal of the audit. In other words, if audit supervisors work with juniors, be a little more imaginative, listen to their thoughts, listen to their recommendation, accept it as suitable feedback, then these kinds of things can make the job a little less tedious and hence eliminate a whole lot of the disadvantages that have been listed. Because now the juniors feel a part of the process, they feel integrated, they don't feel like a robot ticking the box and making it out somewhere. All right. So I think I have yapped enough. You guys have had some great questions. Um, didn't see them coming, but they were excellent and very relevant to the process. Glad you raised that. Okay. Now I'm looking for a reader. Who did not read last week? Anybody remembers? I need someone to throw somebody under the car.
I'll throw myself under.
Okay, India, you throw yourself under?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I escaped last week. I'll read this week if you need
Okay.
me.
Way to go. Way to go that you actually kind of put it in perspective. Look, yeah, I missed last week. I'll throw myself under the bus. Okay. Well, let's go then, India. Audit working papers. I don't know if any of you have ever heard about audit working papers. Anybody ever heard about audit working papers? No?
No,
Great.
what is that?
Now you're going to find out. India, tell them what audit working papers are.
Okay. The audit working papers constitute the link between the auditor's report and the client's records. Documentation is one of the most basic principles listed in the AAS 1. According to the AAS 3, documentation refers to the working papers prepared or obtained by the auditor and retained by him in connection with the performance of his audit. The purpose of an auditor's working papers is to record and demonstrate the audit work from one year to another. Therefore, working papers are essential for the following purposes: A. Controlling current audit work. B. Evidence of audit work performed. C. It provides supporting documents and data. D. It provides important about the business. It provides information about the business being audited. Working papers vary in nature, but the foundation of all working papers can be traced to the basic constitutional document like memorandum and articles of association, partnership deeds, and trust deed, the contents of the minute book, the contents of the balance sheet and profit and loss account, and the letter of engagement.
Before you go on, India, notice all of a sudden all kinds of crazy stuff has come from India in terms of the audit working papers. But I believe you should be getting the idea right away about how important these papers are. It's the documentation process that the auditing standards require. Because if you've checked it but you've not documented, nobody knows you checked it. So as far as the world is concerned, you didn't do a bloody thing, just like compliance issues and other issues. Okay, so whenever we're talking about working papers, we should be talking about important aspects of the audit work, like whatever's going on currently, whatever evidence you have of proof, documentation to prove the information you're looking at. Make sure all of the account information is in place, details about the business being audited, and so on. All of that constitutes part of the audit documentation. It's very necessary as a point of reference. Look at them, make sure the documentation includes the minutes, the balance sheet information, P&L, the letter of engagement that should have been given to the firm by the auditor at the beginning of the audit. All of a sudden, these working papers looks like they need to include everything the auditor is doing. And truth be told, that is exactly what working papers are all about. Very crucial part of the audit process. Okay, keep going, Indian.
Okay, importance of audit working papers. They provide guidance to the audit staff with regards to checking the schedules. The auditor can assign responsibility to the staff member who signs each schedule checked by him. They act as evidence in court when a charge of negligence is brought against the auditor. They represent the planning process for the auditor so that he can estimate the time that may be required for checking the schedules. The auditor should adopt reasonable procedures for custody and confidentiality of his working papers and should retain them for a period of time sufficient to meet the needs of his practice and satisfy any pertinent,
Pertinent.
legal or professional requirements for record retention.
Now, before she goes on, let me ask you guys one question. What does custody mean?
Be in possession
Reasonable
of,
procedures for custody, sorry?
be in possession of something.
Say it again, it sounded a little low. Say it one more time.
To be in possession of
Yeah,
something.
to take possession, but a little more than just taking possession. When something is in custody, what are we doing with it? Generally, we take possession and we do what? We secure it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we take possession and we secure it. So when somebody's been put under arrest, they are put into custody. How do we put them into custody? We put them under arrest, we drive them to the bloody police station, and we lock them behind bars. So we like protecting the arrest, so to speak, so they don't run off. Same thing with audit papers. Reasonable procedures must be in place for custody of protecting the, the paperwork along with its confidentiality so that they don't end up in the wrong hands or they disappear completely somewhere, God forbid, for whatever reason. Okay? Very important. Custody, followed by confidentiality. Okay? And oftentimes, custody has to be sufficient and effective in order to protect the confidentiality. You can't just take your audit papers and when you go somewhere, throw them down for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to have a look. Okay? All right, keep going.
Okay, factors that determine the form and content of audit working papers. Working papers should record the plan, nature, timing, and extent of auditing procedures performed and the conclusions drawn from the evidence obtained. The form and content of working papers are affected by the following: nature of the engagement, form of the auditor's report, nature and complexity of the client's business, nature and condition of the client's records, and the degree of reliance on internal controls. 5, the need for direction, supervision, and the review of work performed by assistants. Working
All part of the auditing working papers. See, very critical. Keep going.
Working papers should be designed and properly organized to meet the circumstances of each audit and the auditor's needs in respect therefore. The standardization of working papers, for example, checklists, specimen letters, standard organization of working papers improve the efficiency with which they are prepared and reviewed. It also facilitates the delegation of work while providing a means to control its quality. Working papers should be sufficiently complete and detailed for an auditor to obtain an overall understanding of the audit. The extent of the documentation is a matter of professional judgment, since it is neither necessary nor practical that every observation, consideration, or conclusion is documented by the auditor in his working papers.
Thank you so much, India. Thank you very much. So now you see, um, she has introduced us to the world of working papers, as with every other aspect of the audit, such as planning, objectivity, programming, audit programs, etc. Now comes the working paper, which is the documentation of everything that auditors do, not the least of which to protect the auditor in the event of being sued. If a company or other person or other entity tries to sue the auditor and say that they didn't conduct a sufficient audit, if the audit papers are in order and available and properly documented, the auditor can then present these papers as evidence in court so that they can overcome a potential lawsuit and save themselves potentially a whole lot of money. Okay? So a lot of work goes into the working papers process, as you can see. A lot of papers are involved, a lot of compilation of documents that have to be put into custody, protected, recorded, and so that they and made available as required with regards to the current audit process and of course even future audits. Because again, if the company comes back to this company and the audit papers for this year are done well, and they come back next year, the jobs are even easier, get the same amount of money for less work, because now they have the papers to refer to, and so just a matter of updating the audit details and getting out of the firm as quickly as possible. Very important process, the documentation process. Okay? It's called audit working papers. Let me just say for the record, auditors are not happy to give anybody their audit working papers. They will only do it if you put a gun to their heads, normally, so to speak, or if a court orders them to do so. They consider their audit papers to be proprietary, which means it's theirs and theirs alone, and they don't want any other auditing firms or anybody else to be looking at them to see how they are structured and what information is in them. Because sometimes the information is very private to the audit firm itself, and they don't even want the client sometimes to see certain notes that are put to the file. Because some of them could well be negative opinions about their very own clients based on what they believe they've seen during the auditing process. All right. Thank you very much, India. Let's see who's going to take us beyond the beyond. Who guys in this room? Okay, who did not read other than India last week? Let's see how far we can take this ethical train. Who did not read last week other than India?
I didn't.
Okay, let's see who confessed. Ebony. Okay, Ebony.
Yeah,
Great confession is good for the,
I guess so.
if you say so. I'm not
Right.
sure all the time. Okay, Ebony, why don't you pick up with the types of audit files? We talked about the audit papers. Now you're going to talk about the audit files because remember, these papers are not just thrown any old place like many firms do with their own documentation. These audit papers are carefully structured and filed away in very specific places. Okay, Ebony, let's see where they are.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to make sure. This is the. Hold on now. Confirm the page, please. Like I feel like I lost track just now.
Oh, page 10, a permanent audit file.
Okay, okay, I was the right place. Sorry. All right. A permanent audit file normally includes one, information concerning the legal and organizational structure of the entity. In the case of a company, this includes the memorandum and article of association. In the case of a statutory corporation, this includes the act of regulation under which the corporation functions. Two, extract copies of important legal documents, agreements, and minutes relevant to the audit. Three, a record of the study and evaluation of the internal controls related to the accounting system. This may be in the form of narrative descriptions, questionnaires, or flow charts, or some combination thereof. Four, copies of audited financial statements for previous year. 5, analysts of significant ratios and trends. 6, copies of management letters issued by the auditor. 7, record of communication with the retiring auditor, if any, before acceptance of the appointment as auditor. 8, notes regarding significant accounting policies. 9, significant audit observations from previous years.
Okay, stick a pin, Ebony. Now notice all those points that she made they compiled a permanent audit file. And that permanent audit file is a file that we don't put anywhere where we can't find it. It contains all the key hardcore documents of the company and the audit process itself, like company minutes, information on the organizational structure, legal documents and agreements, saying minutes of an audit, the board meetings and all this stuff. So these are not stuff you just throw anywhere. Okay. Uh, Copies of audited financials for previous years, ratio and trends that they need to look at from time to time going forward, management letters. These are all key. Retiring auditor, the auditor who you're taking over from, any communication with them, you may have to refer to them for any particular reason, including lawsuits, etc. Any notes that you made regarding important accounting policies and procedures. And of course, last but not least, any significant audit observations from previous years. These go into what we call a permanent audit file because we don't destroy them ever. We don't burn them up because we're in a bad mood. We don't do any of that stuff with the permanent audit file. What we do with it is find a nice fireproof cabinet, safe somewhere within the firm, and tuck them there for each company that you audit, so that if you need to access the permanent audit file anytime, you may do so. Okay, Ebony, keep going.
The current audit file. The current file normally includes one, correspondence relating to the acceptance of the annual appointment. 2, extracts of information matters, important matters in the minutes of board meetings and general meetings relevant to the audit. 3, evidence of the planning of the audit and audit program. 4, analysis of transactions and balances. A record of the nature, timing, and extent of auditing procedures performed and the results of such procedures. 6, evidence that the work performed by assistants were supervised and reviewed. 7, copies of communication with all other auditors, experts, and other third parties. 8, letters of representation and confirmation received from the client. 9, conclusions reached by the auditor concerning significant aspects of the audit, including the manner in which expectations and unusual matters, if any, disclosed by the auditor's procedures were resolved or treated. 10, copies of the financial information being reported and the relative audit report.
So you can see, you're probably beginning to see the different type of documentation that are contained in the current file versus the permanent file. The permanent file has the hardcore legalistic, crucial minutes, memorandums, all that, the legal document, all that stuff is in that permanent file. In the current file, we have more day-to-day active information like correspondence, planning evidence, evidence of analyzing transactions, the more routine day-to-day stuff. Important, yes, but not as critical to the long-term legal position of the firm as those files that are in the permanent file. Doesn't mean that these files in the current files are not important. They're just considered for auditing purposes not as critical as those are in the permanent file. So, of course, I'm sure you figured out that your examiner could easily ask you to differentiate between a permanent file and a current file, and to give some indication of what kinds of information is kept in each type of file. I just made up a question right along the way, okay, just to show you that you can actually start figuring out potentially, not all cases, some of the kinds of questions you can get. Okay? All right, keep going, Ebony.
Okay, importance and custody of working papers. What are the auditor's rights where clients and other auditors seek access to their audit working papers? Auditing and Assurance Standard 1 states that the auditor should respect the confidentiality of information acquired in the course of his work and should not disclose any such information to a third party without specific authority or unless there is a legal or professional duty to disclose. Auditing and Assurance Standard 3 states the working papers are the property of the auditor. The auditor may, at his discretion, make proportions portions of or extract from his working papers available to his client. AAF 3 further requires, paragraph 14, inter alia, that the auditor should adopt reasonable procedures for custody and confidentiality of his working papers. 2, an auditor in practice shall be deemed to be legally or professional misconduct if he disclosed information acquired in the course of this professional agreement to any person other than his client without the consent of his client except when required by any law. 3, requests for working papers may be made by the client or other auditors of the enterprise or its relative enterprise, such as the parent company or subsidiary. An auditor can rely on the work of another auditor without having any right or access to the audit working papers of the other auditor. For this purpose, the term auditor includes internal auditor. 5, the client does not have the right to access the working papers of the auditor. However, the auditor may, in his discretion, in cases considered appropriate by him, make portions or extend the author, extract from his working papers available to the client. Sorry, excuse me one moment.
That's fine. Now notice, even the client who hired the auditor does not have the right to access the auditor's working papers. They are privileged, just like with lawyer and client. Information is privileged as far as the auditors are concerned. Their working papers are sacrosanct. They don't give them to anybody unless they decide to do it or unless they're ordered to do it by the courts. Okay? And notice, even if the auditor's client who hired them and paying them millions of dollars to do the audit, they would ask the auditor to see the working papers, the auditor might well decline because some information in the audit papers might create conflicting issues with the client, and some things would be written that the client don't understand or agree with, then it becomes pretty stinky. Okay, but the auditor has no legal obligation to turn over the information of in his working papers categories. He, though, the auditor, may, in his discretion, depending on the situation, let and allow the client to see extracts. Not all, not everything, not all the auditor's opinions, feelings, and conclusion. Specific things that might be necessary and sufficient to help the client understand some conclusions that are made by the auditor. But that's about it. Other than that, auditors are very, very finicky about their working papers for obvious reasons. All right, keep going, Ebony. Features.
Okay. Working papers, formats, and features. As audit working papers are quite useful, they should be properly prepared. They should always have the following format. A, standard form. They should be prepared in the standard form. The subject matter should be arranged under various headings and subheadings. B, proper layout. There should be a proper design and layout of the working papers. This creates uniformity in the maintenance of working papers. Space for margin. There should be enough space for margin for writing down the auditor's remarks and decisions. Proper organization and arrangement. The working paper should be meticulously organized and arranged. In other words, the working paper should be so organized and arranged that the auditor will be able to locate any particular matter easily. Completeness. The audit working paper should be complete in all respects. They should contain detailed information on all essential factor points. Clarity and accuracy. The working paper should be clear and self-explanatory. The information contained in the working paper should be accurate. Good quality paper. Good quality paper should be used for working papers as they are subject to frequent handling. Ownership
Thank you. Keep going, Ebony.
Ownership and custody of working papers. Working papers are the property of the auditor. The auditor may, at his discretion, make portions or extract from his working papers available to his client. Audit working papers are the property of the auditor, and he is entitled to retain them.
Thank you very much, Ebony. So you see, the auditing papers, not only are they important in terms of setting them up, but they guard them very carefully. They file them very exclusively, and they keep them close to their breasts. Notice how meticulous the auditor would normally be and setting up and preparing those working papers. Many of them have, we're told, a very standard format for doing it. They lay it out in a certain way so that they can understand it. Anybody picking them up this year or 10 years from now, even they have margins in them so they can make notes on the side with regards to certain findings so that they can remember what they did and don't have to try and recall at some future point going back to say, why the heck did we put that there? Okay. The working papers are even arranged in a certain way so that the auditor will be able to locate them, whether it's alphabetically, numerically, alphanumerically, whatever the case might be. They have a whole filing system, a whole bunch of filing people, depending on the size of the auditing firm, to make sure that this process is complete. Okay. Working papers, we're told, again, should be complete in all respects. Nothing should be left out. Important information should be included at every stage. And everything that is considered essential should be in those audit papers and properly filed away. They should be clear. Information should not be written in a way that people can understand it. And we're even told that the information should be self-explanatory. How do we make information self-explanatory for an audit? And audit papers, the same as we do in any other job. Okay, we keep it simple and explicit and to the point. That's how we keep it clear and self-explanatory. Okay? And of course, let's not forget the information in the audit working papers should and must be accurate. Of course, we assume that that's a given, but that's not always the case. Either because people make mistakes or because people deliberately do not report it accurately for some reason or another. And notice all the way down to G, good quality paper. How very detailed is that? Uh, does anybody know why good quality paper is important for the auditor? Good quality paper?
No, can you tell us?
Actually, they do have it there, but it's the reason why it's good for the auditor is the same reason why it's good for you on your job or anybody else on the other job. If you handle the paper a lot, you don't want it to be flimsy, otherwise it's going to fall apart quickly, and the information and data could easily be lost, torn up, disappear off the paper, whatever the case might be, if the paper is not durable. Auditors need their papers to be durable because from year to year, they're constantly referring to previous information with regards to previous audits in terms of current audits. And so papers, and even in the current audit, papers are moving around to a whole lot of people who are holding them, reading them, caressing them, throwing them around, drinking coffee, next by throwing stuff on them, and so on. So if these papers are going to survive audits and post-audit have a life after the audit, certainly the paper itself, it would be a good idea to have it as durable as possible. Of course, durable paper costs a little more money, but what the heck? Because auditors rely on their information so sufficiently and so critically, it is in their interest to make sure that the paper can stand the test of time, especially when it comes to doing research for a possible lawsuit. Nobody thinks about these details until a lawsuit or some such thing comes up, and then suddenly we're trying to find that document, and by the time we get to it, it's all torn up, busted. You can hardly read what's on it. Pieces in one file, another pieces in another file, and so on. And so now you can't use it as evidence to defend yourself in a court matter. See, believe it or not, this stuff goes all the way down even to that aspect of things, for sure. All right. Any questions about module 3? Yeah, module 3 is a very interesting operational type of module. It's the nitty-gritty part of getting the audit up and off the ground. But believe it or not, the filing and custody of all those working papers is not where the whole audit process ends. Okay? Critical as it seemed, it would have been a great place to take a bow and say yes, but there are some other things going on in the audit. And so we are going to move into those areas now for just a few moments, and then we'll break until the next session. I just want to warm you up so that this holiday weekend, you can go over and catch up on all of the reading that you need to, including what we've done this evening, and of course beyond. Remember the module 4 and 5, read as much of those two as you can, because when we come back next week, we'll be covering as much of those two modules as time would permit. And then, of course, wherever we stop, if we get through both of them, fine. If not, wherever we stop, that is what you will be responsible for. But in any event, I think you're more than enough to keep you busy this weekend. And anybody who's having fun in this class this weekend should feel guilty. You should be doing nothing much other than studying, reading, reviewing, taking notes, looking at your case, studying, reading, reviewing, taking notes, and suffering like all students should. How about that?
Thank God it could be rainy this weekend.
Exactly.
I guess going to say no one have anywhere to go.
Absolutely. So you guys don't have to worry so much. Even those persons who would normally be having fun, they will not have any fun according to the weather report. And so you guys can do your review and your study and all that stuff with the full knowledge that they'll be stopped just like you are. That's any consolation. All right. So just as an introduction to module 4 uh, talks not about audit planning and working papers and custody and all that very important stuff, but it now talks about the techniques that auditors use. And again, some of you, depending on the job you work in now and the job you'll have next year, the job you'll have 10 years from now, see my point? You don't know where you're going to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I can tell you, you cannot see it now, but a whole lot of this crazy stuff is going to be stuck somewhere, whether you like it or not. By the time you finish, some of this is going to be stuck somewhere, and it will come up to the surface many times in one form or another that will be of great assistance to you, whether you realize it or not. And when you do, and if you do realize, you're like, wow, this thing really does bloody work. Even though I did this like 5 years ago, I can still say to somebody, oh, no, 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 no. That's not the way to do it. When our auditors come in here, they'll be looking for this, this, and this. So we must make sure that we do this, this, and this. See my point? Things like that. All right. So the auditor then has certain techniques that they use to do the audit once they come in. And one of the key techniques that the auditors have under their belt at their disposal is something we call test checking. Test checking. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, the paragraph is in front of you for those who see it. It simply means that test checking is an in-depth examination. See, detailed examination of a few selected transactions from the beginning to the end. Very interesting concept for the auditor. Even persons who are not auditors, if you're responsible for checking stuff, you can apply these things on your job if you're responsible for checking stuff as well. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay? If you're an internal auditor, become an internal auditor even, you can use some of this stuff in conducting your internal audit. Instead of checking everything, you do a test check, which means that you take some large balances from a particular account or transaction environment, and you say, okay, these are the 5 or 7 or 10 significant accounts that occurred in this month. I'm going to do an in-depth examination of these because the other ones with lesser balance and itsy bitsy amounts, they're important, but they're not as crucial as these that have balances in the thousands and maybe millions. I'll check these 10 for the month because they're significant. And I will do an in-depth examination of those selected accounts that I've chosen, but I will do that check from start to finish in detail. That's what check testing is all about. Such that when you finish with that review, you are satisfied that whatever potentially went through that account was particularly correct for all intents and purposes. And even if something is not correct or fell to the cracks in an area that you may not have looked at in terms of smaller balances, the fact that the major account balances that you did check in detail actually check out will give you the assurance that the transactions in that particular account or situation are sufficient. That, students, is what we call test checking, an in-depth examination of a few selected key transactions. Okay. Notice it involves a review of the entire flow of the transaction from start to finish. From it was written up, the details on the voucher, every step it went throughout the organization, all the approval processes, all the signature requirements, all the quadruplicate copies that had to be made, its flow in and out of the warehouse, in and out of the requisition area, whatever the flow of those transactions that you select are, you check every single detail, okay? From the recording of the transaction all the way through to the end of the transaction. And if those that you select of significant balances check out after that detail check, then the auditor says, I'm satisfied that this account is sufficient in what it presents. And so therefore it relies on those few significant detail checks to satisfy itself that the rest of the transactions in the account are reasonable or reasonably correct. Is he 100% certain of that? No. Could there be errors among the smaller balances or fraud even among the smaller balances? Certainly. But the assurance the auditor gets from making sure from start to finish his check of the significant balances in that account is oftentimes sufficient for the auditor to be satisfied. Okay? That's the beauty. And again, that's part of the audit plan process. And this is done unknown in advance. Okay? All right. I think I'm going to stop there. So, because you guys have been just totally amazing, you just went through this whole bloody thing. So we'll stop there tonight. When we meet next week, Thursday, we'll go as far. I'm certain we'll finish with this particular module. Whether we finish all of 5, let's not worry about it. We'll just play it by ear. If we get through it, fine. If we don't get through the entire thing, we will get through some of it. And then wherever we stop, that is where you'll be responsible for your examination. However, don't let that stop you from reading both manuals, certainly 4, because we are going to finish 4 next week, and go ahead and read module number 5, because we might even get through the whole thing. And if we don't, it doesn't matter. You'll still be ahead of the game. Any questions, anyone, before we break? All right. Believe it or not. Yeah. Question? You know?
Sorry, did you mark the register?
I did. Let me see if I have
Oh.
Danielle on this list. Danielle.
Okay, well, I wasn't here when you were marking the register.
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. Let me just make a note here, Danielle.
Neither was I, so you can make sure, please.
Monique, let me see if I have you here. Ebony. Ebony. Okay, yep, Ebony. Let me just put a tick there. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Did I tell you that you get credit for attending class and all that?
Yes, you did.
How much did I say you get for that?
Is it 10?
5%?
Absolutely, 10%. So, not that 10%. Not that that has to be done, but I like to do that so that I encourage students to come to the sessions, because you pick up all kinds of things, especially questions that, in addition to the lectures themselves, students ask some very interesting questions that you can learn a whole lot of bits and pieces from, and just kind of get tied up in the whole process, and of course get credit at the same time. And I've had some students that 10% was the difference between this and that and the other and the other and the other. So it's a pretty good incentive. Any other questions? All right, believe it or not, I'm also going to be home for the holiday weekend, finding around doing stuff. So if you get stuck and you have a question, please send me an email or blah, 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 and I shall be happy to respond. I will not have up my do not disturb sign, so feel free if you have a question along the way while you're suffering through your reading and diligently making your notes and studying and preparing for your midterm, right? Other than that, please be safe. COVID has not gone anywhere. I understand that cases have gone up fourfold recently, from 200 something to 1100 something in Nassau, the Bahamas. So do not take anything for granted. A lot of people are away from work because they have COVID or COVID-related illnesses, etc. So this thing is still out there, students, and you don't want anything, if you can help it, to interfere with your program this semester. Okay? So take care, and I'm here if you need me. Okay?
Okay, everybody have a good weekend.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good
Take care.
night.
Good night.
Good
Okay,
night.
thank you. Good night.
Good night. My pleasure.